Welcome to this interview with Eddy, one of the world's leading high conflict specialists. In this interview, he shares his insights and practical tips on how to respond to written, hostile communication. All of these tips he has captured in his book, BIFF. I highly recommend it. It is as good as the title suggests. We join this interview as he provides us with his definition of high conflict people. Thank you. One of the things I love about your work is the simplicity in how you express and explain things that are easy to overcomplicate. Your definition is a perfect example of that, your definition of high conflict people. Can you take us through your definition, the characteristics of high conflict people, and the difference between someone who may be presenting traits versus being a high conflict personality?
Okay, great, thanks. Let me first emphasize the first thing about high conflict people is that we like to think they're the most difficult people because they really have four key characteristics. The first is that they have what we call a target of blame. They're preoccupied with blaming others, and they often focus on a particular person or a group of people and kind of blame that person for everything. And it may be they've actually created a lot of problems in their own lives, but they can't see that. They're blind to that, and so they're preoccupied with blaming somebody else for whatever it is that's happening. So that concept of a target of blame, listeners may be familiar with that if they've been somebody's target of blame. I don't have to explain it too much because they know what that's like. It's not comfortable at all. So that's really the first characteristic. The second is a lot of all or nothing thinking. So they see some people as all good, they see other people as all bad. In a work group, they often talk to the people they think of as all good about how bad the other people are who they see as all bad. So you can see that's a concept we actually call splitting. It's a mental health term for people seeing all good or all bad, but no gray area in between. And they don't really see themselves as responsible for things. So things just happen to them. The third characteristic is unmanaged emotions, and not all high conflict people show this, but some do a lot. So you'll have someone storm out of a staff meeting or start yelling at somebody in the office so others can hear. And you see this kind of loss of control. And then sometimes they apologize afterwards, and sometimes they don't. So unmanaged emotions for some people, but not others. Some people are over-controlled, and you don't know when they're going to kind of blow up, and they look too kind of tight. But there isn't a flexibility to their emotions that's managed. It's too tight or too loose. And the fourth area really is extreme behaviors. And this can be, first of all, what I mentioned, yelling, running out of meetings, but also this could be breaking property, stealing from a company or organization because they feel they have a right to because somebody else did something wrong, spreading rumors by email, sometimes even violence. And so extreme behaviors seem to be a common characteristic of high conflict people, even though violence isn't all that common. These are the people that engage in that, and they tend to get there after having experienced these unmanaged emotions. Like things build up. But these four characteristics, usually when I talk to people, I say, well, do you notice this? Do you notice that? And they say, yep, 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 yep. So it's pretty common. We're seeing this. So high conflict people seem to have these four characteristics. Now, you asked about traits versus being a high conflict person. Now, traits we think of in terms of personality problems. So some people have personality disorders, Some people have traits of those disorders. And so looking at this continuum, we really see people, in a sense, ordinary people have effective problem solving most of the time. They may have situational difficulties, but it's not part of their personality. Your personality is how you routinely think, manage your feelings, and show your behavior. And so for some people, or for all of us actually, situational difficulties like really working long hours, being up all night on a project, going through a divorce, some other hardship, job loss, etc., can make it harder for us to be effective, but it's not really part of who we are. When we look at high conflict personalities, such as in the slide, people tend to have a pattern of behavior. That's what personality is a pattern. But some people just have some traits of these problems, so it's not as severe. But the main thing I want to say about that is don't worry about trying to identify, does this person have a personality disorder or just some traits? If you suspect someone has a high conflict personality, you need to adapt the way that you work with them. So we're going to talk about that, but for right now, is just realize people are on a continuum, and you don't have to figure this out to use the method we're going to talk about today, the BIFF response method. So that's kind of a brief overview. I might add, when we look at personality disorders in the right-hand column there, some research in the United States that was done about 10 years ago came to the conclusion that about 15% of the United States population meets the criteria for a personality disorder. So that's pretty substantial. And when I've spoken at seminars and presented to people in Australia, I've often asked, do you think that the study results that I've talked about are probably similar here, or you be quite different? Maybe the beach and the water makes people get along better and not have personality disorders. But the professionals I'm talking to usually say it's probably pretty similar. It seems to be partly culture and partly biology. And so I think we have pretty similar populations, which means both countries have a lot of people with these personality problems, and many of them are high conflict people. Not all. Some of them don't have a target of blame, but many of them do. So that's kind of my quick overview of about a 6-hour course on personality.
Well, I think I'd be inclined to agree with you, Bill. I think we probably got a very similar percentage of people who do present with personality disorders or with that high conflict pattern of behaviour, and hence the interest in these topics, and in particular the skills that you provide to us. So some of us get to the beach a little bit more than others, though. Bill,
Yeah.
you go on to introduce us to a concept of blame speak, and you explain it as the language of high conflict thinking. It was a new term for me until I had read the book, and it's easy to sort of reflect on yourself and go, oh, this can be a little bit confronting, because sometimes we can slip into these patterns where it's easy to blame somebody else, especially when we might be experiencing a combination of stresses that are happening in our life that maybe get us to present some of the characteristics or traits of high conflict people. Can you expand on high conflict blaming and blame speak?
Yeah, it really, I think it's almost become a language in modern times. Terms like "it's all your fault" and disparaging remarks. You're the worst person I've ever met, or you should be ashamed. Your profession should be ashamed of you. It's this kind of extreme language, and emotionally intense language. And I think very much the internet has helped this happen, because people don't have the normal restraints they would have putting things in a letter or speaking to someone who's standing right in front of them. So I think we've seen an escalation of it, but we're also seeing it in front of each other. So people in an office may start saying things, and they can be very personal about people's intelligence, morals, all of that. And it's kind of all or nothing. It's it's all your fault and none my fault. That's kind of how it's approached. Maybe just vague terms. Um, and blowing things out of proportion, taking them out of context. That someone did something once and they just say, you always do this, and if you were to really look at it, it did happen, but it only happened once out of 100 times or whatever. Often people are telling other people and drawing other people into these kind of high conflict blaming situations. And you can feel it. If you're overhearing blame speak, it often gives you an uncomfortable gut feeling, because it's just, you realize this is not going to get better, it's just going to get worse. And if someone attacks you verbally like this, it's very tempting to respond with blame speak back. And they'll say, well, you're an idiot. And you'll say, no, you're the idiot. And it just takes off and escalates from there. So we're starting to hear that, and I call that blame speak. And frankly, when I wrote the book, it's gotten worse since then. Mm-hmm. So we're really seeing this as part of our culture now, and I think we need to be aware of it and avoid doing it ourselves.
And I think it's one of the challenges of modern day corporate culture, which is predominantly where my clients reside, and I think it's becoming one of those essential skills that the managers need to learn, to recognize it, but not only recognize it, but to do something about it. And how to do something about it is important. It's really important.
Right.
So, how to handle blame speak and high conflict attacks when they're directed at you personally. We've got the delightful BIFF technique that you expand on in the book, and you introduce us to this new approach. You encourage us to adopt the BIFF technique. And the acronym is not what the aim under the Australian definition of what BIFF is. The acronym does not represent what we are. We as Australians know as BIFF. We're not looking to resolve the conflict with a fight in the backyard, but rather the Bill Eddy technique of BIFF. Bill, can you introduce us to BIFF, please?
Sure. And I first want to agree with you. When I first brought BIFF to Australia, someone said, well, do you know that that's a fist fight at a sporting event or something? And I was saying, oh no, I'm trying to have this be a solution. And so what I emphasize is I call it a BIFF response. In other words, it isn't let's have a BIFF, it's here's a way you can respond to a BIFF. So it's a BIFF response, and I think that's the way it makes it easier for Australians to go, okay, well, that's different than from what we're used to at the sporting events. Because I saw a newspaper title once that said, fans want more BIFF at their games.
Yes.
And I couldn't agree more. I just wanted to be this BIFF. Yeah. So this BIFF is basically 4 parts. It's brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And in terms of brief, it really doesn't need to be very long. Even if what you're responding to has been 2 or 3 pages of an email or a letter, or somebody's just gone on and on and on, being brief really helps. It doesn't give very much for the other person to react to, and you're trying not to trigger defensiveness. And it's interesting when you think about the brain that our defensive thinking, once it gets hooked, starts to be high conflict, all or nothing, emotional, etc. So we're trying not to hook in the more defensive part of the brain. And by keeping it brief, there's not much there to respond to. So that's the first part. That's what we're really emphasizing.
And it's such a natural response to go, "Oh, that's not true," and want to respond to every comment that is out there. It's just such an automatic response. We want to gush.
Right, exactly. And this helps you not do that, because you realize if you've only got 2 or 3 sentences, you better spend them on giving some information rather than just saying that's not true or you're the idiot instead, something like that. So that's why beg your pardon?
So less is more.
Exactly. Less is more, and that's a big part of BIFF response. And frankly, people are relieved, because I know people have spent hours preparing a really long response to something someone else has said, and they go, I have to show them they're wrong. I have to tell them they can't treat me that way. And it's like the longer you go, the worse it's going to get. So brief, it's amazing. It really helps you. You get in and you get out, and it doesn't take much time at all. But yes, informative is really the next aspect. And this also helps because you want to just give straight information about the subject that's being discussed. So it's not defensive, it's not emotional, it's not addressing every single issue the other person raised. And later in this hour, I'll give you a couple examples of how short a BIFF can be. Even when someone lists about 10 things they think you've done wrong, is you don't have to respond to all 10. Often a global statement is sufficient that just says, here's some information you may not have, and I have a different point of view, and then move on. So you're trying to shift the discussion from emotions and defensiveness to something more objective, that's just straight information. Now, the third part is friendly, and people may wonder, why are you friendly when the person's been hostile towards you? Well, this doesn't have to be super friendly, but if you're hostile back, it keeps the person in the defensive part of their brain, and you're going to get a new hostile response to that hostile response. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, well, if I give a hostile response back, they'll see that I don't agree, and they'll just stop. And unfortunately, with high conflict people, a hostile response is an engaging response and tends to get more. So friendly is helpful. Just say something, friendly at first, like, thanks for responding to my letter, my email, my request, whatever it is. And thanks for letting me know your thoughts on that. Those kinds of things. Then give your straight information. And then end with a closing, hope you have a nice weekend, or I appreciate your commitment to solving this. Just something that's like that. So it's really a calm response. You're acting the way you want them to respond in many ways, is calmly. And what's interesting is emotions are contagious, and high conflict emotions are highly contagious. But staying calm, staying matter of fact, keeping things brief is also contagious. So hopefully they'll absorb the way you're responding, and if you're friendly back, it often just stops the hostility in its tracks.
It's very, very difficult to be friendly when you've been hit with all this hostility. How much of a difference does it make, in your opinion, if you're not friendly, rather more impersonal or just simply neutral?
My experience is if they're hostile and you're neutral, that they often continue to be hostile, or feel that you're being neutral is abrupt. Like sometimes people do a response and the other person may, say a whole lot of stuff, and they say, and what do you have to say about that? And the other person responds with one word, nothing. And that's too abrupt. If you're given a BIFF response, you want to shift the tone. Think of this way that you're shifting the tone of the conversation. If you're too abrupt, too brief, like one word or two words, it can feel perhaps like an insult or a slap to the person. So it's really better to find something that you can say that's a little bit friendly. It doesn't have to be much. And I find a lot of people now especially that I've taught this to or who've read the BIFF book, start out by saying, thank you for something. And then they give information, etc. So even if you just say, thank you for responding, thank you for inquiring, thank you for something, it just shifts the tone, because that's really what you want to do.
It makes sense. And I think for me, when I first started using the BIFF technique, this was probably the hardest bit to do.
I think you're right, and people often kind of grumble about this part, but some people do. Yeah, some people write out of their first response what they feel like sending, and they don't send it. And I encourage that you don't even write it on your computer. Write it on a piece of paper so you don't accidentally hit send.
Yeah.
So, and that often people get it off their chest just to themselves, and then they go, okay, now I'm going to write a BIFF response. So sometimes it helps to do that, or maybe even talk to somebody and kind of get it off your chest a little and then write your BIFF response. But being friendly really helps end the conversation, even if you're not excited about it. Give it a try. And I've been doing these now for about 7 years, and it gets a lot easier, and you don't take it as personally. It's like, oops, now I got to do another BIFF response. But it's not about you. It's about the person who expressed hostility over the top, who really was extreme.
And one of the things that some of my clients have reported back to me about when they've started using the BIFF response at work, they often get feedback from their bosses because they've been seen to handle in a polite and friendly way at difficult situations. So reputationally, it looks good for them. Even if it's challenging to be friendly and polite, it looks really good for them.
And you're very accurate with that. I've had several people after going through a training, I get an email like the next day, and they say, I rewrote something I was sending, and my boss said it's like the best letter they'd ever seen, or something like that. So it really helps people look good, and plus you feel good because you haven't gotten down in the mud with the other person. The other person's been hostile, and you've been respectful. So I really agree, and I get a lot of that feedback also.
That's right.
So, yeah, so let me also mention the last F, which is firm. And I want to make sure people understand this doesn't mean harsh. What it means is it ends the conversation. You just want to put it to rest. So you're disengaging from the person, and you're letting go of the dispute. Now, in some cases, you might say, I need a response, now that you've heard this information, can you please respond by Wednesday at 5 o'clock and let me know yes or no? So if you give them a narrow choice with a response date, like 2 choices, then that will help you. Keep it closed. But the idea is to end the hostilities, and that's what firm means. Doesn't mean being harsh, just means, and that's where you can say, and have a nice weekend, or I appreciate, your commitment to resolving this issue, something like that. So that's a way that makes it a complete BIFF response.
And to me, working with the components of firm, it means that you're actually accelerating the closure of the issue, or if there's ongoing communication to be had, you're actually making it happen quicker. And people often get out what they want to say, or this is incorrect information, or this, that, and the other, but they don't actually put that closure piece in. And so it still seems unfinished or drags on. I think it's a really important part to remember to do.
Right, right. Because it's so easy for it to keep going. If you don't kind of calm it and end it, the other person thinks you're still ready for an argument.
Yeah.
Or sometimes people say, so what do you think about that? Well, that's going to get a response. You don't want to say, so what do you think about that?
Yeah.
You can just say, you know, that's all I have to say on that. Or just simply, here's my information, and, you know, thanks for listening, or something. I'm thinking this might be a good time to give an example of this.
That'd be great.
I've got a family example and a workplace example. So I'll start with the family example because everyone can identify with this, I think. And this is a divorce case. The couple got divorced a couple of years before, but they've got young children, and they occasionally get into these email arguments about the parenting schedule. So let me read this out loud. So Joe sends an email, and then Jane responds. And so here's Joe's email. Jane, I can't believe you're so stupid as to think I'm going to let you take the children to your boss's birthday party during my parenting time. Have you no memory of the last 6 conflicts we've had about my parenting time? Or are you having an affair with him? I always knew you would do anything to get ahead. In fact, I remember coming to your office party witnessing you making a total fool of yourself, including flirting with everyone from the CEO down to the mailroom kid. Are you high on something? Haven't you gotten your finances together enough to support yourself yet without flinging yourself at every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and on and on and on for 2 full pages? So now here's Jane's response, and let's see if it's a BIFF response. Thank you for responding to my request to take the children to my office party. Just to clarify, the party will be from 3 to 5 on Friday at the office, and there'll be approximately 30 people there, including several other parents bringing school-age children. There will be no alcohol, as it's a family-oriented firm, and there'll be family-oriented activities. I think it will be a good experience for the kids to see me at my workplace. Since you do not agree, then of course I will respect that and withdraw my request, as I recognize it is your parenting time. And that's the end of her email. So let's look at that. Is that brief? Yeah, that's pretty brief. It's, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. Was it informative? Yeah, straight information about the time of the party, who's attending, etc. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't opinions, just straight information. And by the way, she didn't respond to all those things that Joe said. Just you can get from the tone of this that she's not buying into what he's saying and that there really isn't substance to what he's saying. Then it was friendly. She started with thank you and ended with I recognize it is your parenting time. And it was firm, and then it closed the discussion. Now, she could have decided to say, with this information, I hope you'll reconsider. Please let me know yes or no by Wednesday at 5 o'clock. But in this case, she knows Joe. She and Joe go around like this a lot, and she's not going to keep it going. So it's always a judgment call. There's no one right way to write a BIFF response as long as it's brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So that's an example.
That's a good example.
Now, we've got some things to avoid, and I should mention those now. And that is what we call the 3 A's. It's good to avoid admonishments in a BIFF response, because admonishments are like talking down to someone and just feed the hostility, anger, frustration, etc. So that's not good. And you want to look and see before you send it, do I have an admonishment in there? Likewise, having advice in there. A lot of people are tempted to say, let me tell you, buddy, you need to do such and such. And in the office, it's tempting to do that. And I've worked with some adult children and parents who like to give each other admonishments and advice. And it doesn't work. It just tends to build resentment and increase the conflict. Next is no apologies. And this is special to dealing with high conflict people, because I love apologies and I believe in apologies with 85% of people. But high conflict people have a lot of all or nothing thinking, and so if you apologize to them, they interpret that as meaning that it's entirely your fault and that you agree. So avoid apologies as well, because it's almost like giving them ammunition. And I've seen people carry letters around and it said, see, you apologized, you admitted it was all your fault. And often it's really the high conflict person that's saying that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's better not to feed them anything they can use against you. So those three are particularly ones to watch out for. Now, if someone's writing a BIFF response, we always encourage that you have someone else look at it if you have time. And so that would be coaching. And we've developed a method of coaching, and it's in the back of the BIFF book. It's the last chapter of the book, and it has 10 questions to ask. And you can probably guess what the first 4 questions are. Is it brief, informative, friendly, and firm? But it has other questions too. So if you're helping someone, a client at work or a colleague, or perhaps even a friend or family member, it helps to go through those 10 questions, and it helps them think it through. So if you have someone you're coaching and they've written a BIFF response and they say, hey Tess, what do you think of this? Then Tess could ask them the 10 questions and have the person who wrote it look at it and decide if they want to make changes, because the idea is to get someone comfortable writing a good BIFF response themselves rather than depending on someone else to change it and clean it up. And we found over the years, I mean, we've trained hundreds of people in this method, and they like it because it helps them think. It's simple, and the coaching part also is simple because it just sticks with these 10 questions that help the person focus on what they've written and maybe make some changes to it. So I'm not going to get all into that, except that the first 4 are the brief, informative, friendly, and firm. It's spelled out in the book and helps people reflect. I can actually give you the other 3, because this is the first 7 questions, is does it have any admonishments, any advice, or any apologies? So then the person goes into if there's anything they want to change, and the person who's coaching doesn't say what their thoughts are until they've had the person who wrote the BIFF response reflect on it themselves. So that's really the goal of the coaching, is to help people improve how they write it, because you want to walk away thinking, you know, I did a good job of writing that, instead of walking away and saying, boy, my coach is really smart.
It's nice to have that. It's nice to have that combination, though.
Yeah, I mean, actually the ideal, I guess, is to walk away thinking I did a good job and so did my coach.
Yeah. I have to admit, Bill, recently I was in a situation where I had to write a response, and I did go through the BIFF questions myself, and I thought I had done a really good job of making sure it was BIFF, and I had passed it. I actually passed it on to 2 other people and I got one of them to coach me through the questions, and there was still a lot I needed to do. And when you're in that moment, sometimes it's so hard to see your own tone, your own emotions filtering through your words, and you're thinking, that's fair, but you've got to
Right.
step it out. So, and I changed it significantly going through the questions myself, but it was so powerful to have my coach.
Right, right. And I've had that when I've had someone else do it. I was working with the paralegal where I was doing mediations, who now is the BIFF response coordinator for High Conflict Institute. And I used to give these to her that I would need to write, and she would help me trim them about in half. And she was always right. One thing that was funny, one time as a lawyer, I was writing a letter and I sent it to my client to review before I sent it to the other lawyer. And my client called me up and he said, you've got something in here that you would have been concerned about if I wrote, you know. And I went back and read it, and it's just like you said. I just missed that really was something that wouldn't be good there. It just came out. And so it's so helpful to get coaching. I definitely encourage people to do that.
Bill,
Now, I do have another example I can give you, the workplace example.
Bill, can we just talk a little bit about, you may as well share a little bit about your BIFF responses services and website.
Sure. Happy to do that. We do have a website. It's biffresponse.com. And we have the woman who used to be the paralegal working with me in my mediations, is the BIFF response coordinator, and she does coaching. So people can sign up for 30 minutes or 60 minutes of coaching if they want, if they're in a situation, and she can help them walk through some things to consider to do or not to do. We also have some articles there. I believe we have the article that you've sent out with this webinar, and I'm going to read from that article, a workplace example. But we also have a couple DVDs that show how to write a BIFF response and how to coach for a BIFF response. We also have those available online, so people don't have to pay to have a DVD shipped. You can just go to the website, and it links to our High Conflict Institute website where we have a dozen videos or so. So we've got also the book, which is BIFF, Quick Responses to High Conflict People, Their Personal Attacks, Hostile Email, and Social Media Meltdowns. So if you go to biffresponse.com, we've got a lot of information there. We also have a blog from time to time and some other articles. But I think people find it's a great resource, and that BIFF is growing. I think we're getting more and more people doing BIFF responses, and we're now getting feedback that sometimes the other person, the hostile person, is changing how they write in response to someone writing them BIFF responses. So it's very excited about it. Yeah.
Bill, I've got a couple of questions here. We've got a question from Peter. How do you keep friendly without appearing sarcastic?
I think it's kind of like you were saying, the tone. So you want to be careful you're not going overboard. If you just say thank you, usually that can be interpreted as just thank you. So if there's anything critical in there, and then you have this, it's not going to work. That's why it's got to be brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So if someone says, and I'm not responding any further, have a nice weekend. If you say I'm not responding any further in an abrupt tone, then have a nice weekend doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So you want to be you want to be attentive to the tone, so it's not a mixture of negative and friendly. You want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure there's no negative tone in there. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the key. Yeah.
We've also got another question here from Sandra, and she's interested in your views on how to respond to nasty anonymous comments to an online blog. And she says here that the usual advice is not to respond at all. Would you agree with that?
Most of the time I don't agree with that. One of the benefits of a BIFF response is you just don't leave somebody else's negativity hanging. I like to think of it as pouring cold water on the flames, and if you leave the flames burning, sometimes you get burned. So I think it's better to respond, but with a BIFF response. Just keep it
Mm-hmm.
brief. And so, thank you for your comment. You may not be aware. Here's some information, and uh, then just ending it. And that's that. Hope that's helpful, or something like that. So you don't let it linger there. And I think in general, and it's also true with verbal comments, that, I mean, you can use BIFF responses in person as well. And if someone's saying something nasty, you don't want to just leave it hanging there. And I also think about this in politics. It's like having a politician where only one side is addressing an issue. You don't want to seem like you're not responding, because it makes it seem like you agree that it's true. And so it's better to respond, but with a BIFF response. Just keep it very brief, informative, friendly, and firm.
Mm. I can add to that in terms of I agree. It's in many cases I would not leave a response, not leave a response. And I've got the story with a gentleman by the name of Ben Tapawai, and he's one of the Australian rugby union player, and he shared a story at an event we hosted a little while ago about receiving really negative and criticism on his Twitter feed about fumbling the ball on the football field, etc. And he learnt to just say, "Oh, I'll have a better game next week," or "I'll see you on the paddock next week," and not buy into any of their comments, but just turning it around to, well, keeping it future orientated and go, "Well, here's to next week," or something like that, and just not buying into that negativity, because it can build and create its own momentum.
Right, and that's a great approach, is just, a light response that shows I'm not defensive about this issue. I'm not going to respond with hostility, and people go, oh, look at his response, so it must be a problem that really isn't a problem.
Yeah.
Something like that.
After all, we all have bad days at the office. So
That's right. That's right.
yeah. So you have another example, Bill. You have a work example for
Yeah,
us?
let me do this one pretty briefly. This is in the handout that's available to people, that's called BIFF Response at Work. And it's someone, it's a real case scenario. Someone was fired from their job for various inappropriate reasons, and they're they're now asking for something. So Jerry is the human resource person they've been communicating with. And frankly, I might mention it sometimes helps to keep the door open to some communication, so it's not too abrupt and abandoning where you trigger the person to come back, and just to get attention they show up at the workplace again. So being able to email the manager is something that was acceptable and I think beneficial here. So she says, "Hi, Jerry. I had another job interview this week. This is good because my medical benefits are running out thanks to you. You had no right to ruin my career and make it impossible for me to get a good letter of reference. Your corrupt company will be exposed sooner or later. By the way, I need a copy of that last list of job duties that I had. I've asked you 3 times for it and you refuse to respond. Let me know if I need to drop by to pick it up. Your old friend, Roberta. Now, here's how Jerry's thinking of responding. Let's see if it's a BIFF response. Hi, Roberta. First of all, it will not benefit you at all to make threats about exposing our company. We have done nothing wrong and are ready to refute any claims you may raise against us. I was not aware of you ever asking for a list of your job duties. Please see it attached. As a reminder, you are not allowed to return to our company nor allowed to set foot on our grounds. We will have you arrested if you attempt to do so. I hope this message is clear. Sincerely, Jerry. Well, that's not really a BIFF response. It is pretty brief, but it's way over the top with information that's defensive, argumentative, opinion and such, admonishments, etc. It's not friendly, and it's not firm, and it's kind of challenging, and this is the kind of person he's writing to who might just show up now at the company and stand 2 inches from the edge of the property just to prove that she can, give them a hard time. So instead, let's look at this other alternative and see if this is better. It says, Dear Roberta, I'm glad you're making progress in getting interviews. I really want you to find a company that's a good fit for you. I'm attaching a copy of your job duties. I hope that helps. Best wishes, Jerry. Now, is that brief? Yep, that's quite brief. Is it informative? Yes, he's providing the job duties that she wanted. Was it friendly? Yeah, he's glad she's making progress, hopes she finds a company that's a good fit. And that's often what we encourage saying when there's someone that has to be fired is, we have different styles, so, best wishes with a place where there's a better fit for you. And is it firm? Yeah, I'm attaching the job duties. I hope that helps. That's the end. And of course, best wishes. That's the other friendly part. So that's a quick example, and that's basically how BIFF works. So I hope people find it useful and enjoy practicing writing BIFF responses.
It's been an amazing technique for me, and it's been a game changer not only for me but for quite a few of my clients. I think probably 80% of my clients have all read your book. Some of them have attended your workshops. It is a game changer, and for me it actually simplifies things. You reduce the amount of decisions you have to make because you've got this guide that says, well, is it brief, is it formative, and while you still have to analyze what you're doing, it just makes it quicker and easier, and it takes the angst out of what am I going to do and when can I start it, because you've got what you need to do there and you can work through it. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Well, thank you.
As you know, I'm a big fan, Bill. So, well, we do like to keep things on time, and we have come to the end of our time, and I would like to thank you again for taking the time out and sharing your words of wisdom with our your fellow BIFF friends and the new people who are learning it. So thank you very, very much, Bill.
My pleasure. And I do want to mention that people can check out our website at highconflictinstitute.com, get our monthly e-newsletter, which talks about events coming up, and that each September I come to Australia and I'll be giving some seminars in Melbourne. So if anybody's interested in keeping track, they should sign up for the e-newsletter on our website.
Absolutely. And I have to say I can testify for Bill's seminars, having attended about 4 of them now. Highly, highly worth it. So, well, thank you very, very much, Bill, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.